Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. I was born under the dim glow of a crescent moon, in a cottage woven from brambles and elderwood. Mama said I didn't cry when I came into the world, only blinked once, twice, and then looked at her like I had known her for centuries. That was how witches were born, she said, not in noise, but in knowing. Our cottage sat tucked in the belly of the forest, where the pines whispered secrets and the rivers hummed lullabies. My earliest memory is of the wind. It came to me like a friend, rustling through my cradle of moss and feathers. I thought it spoke, not in words, but in something deeper, a feeling, like being held. Mama always said our magic came from listening. That witches aren't born with power, but with the ears to hear it, the eyes to see it, and the heart to hold it. She taught me to press my ear to the earth and feel its sleepy breath, to cup moonlight in my palms and whisper dreams to the stars. On the morning of my 7th year, Mama gave me my first real spellbook. It wasn't a thick, leather-bound tome with golden clasps like the ones in fairy tales. No, it was made from pressed bark, stitched with thorns, and smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. The cover read, "For the budding witch, a path grown, not given." Spells aren't recipes, Mama said as I ran my fingers over the pages. They're songs you learn to sing with the world. Each page was handwritten in curling ink, filled with sketches of herbs, phases of the moon, and charming little notes like best used on foggy mornings or do not try when grumpy. That last one had a doodle of a frowning frog. I smiled at that. That day, we walked the forest together, collecting ingredients. The first spell I was to learn was the Whispering Wind, a simple one that called a breeze to carry your thoughts. It was meant for sending wishes or secrets too heavy to say aloud. I picked mint leaves still glistening with dew, gathered morning spider silk from the corners of elder trees, and found a stone shaped like a heart. Mama showed me how to bundle them together with a strand of my hair, tie it with a black thread, and hold it close to my lips. "Say your truth," she whispered. I didn't know what truth to speak. I was only 7, and my heart felt too big for words. So I said what came, "I want to be a good witch, like Mama." The breeze came slowly, swirling around us like a curious spirit. It tickled my cheeks and lifted the bundle from my hands. I gasped as it floated away, vanishing into the trees. Mama smiled, her eyes shining like lake water at dusk. "Then you've already begun." That night, I dreamed of wildflowers singing and stars dancing like fireflies. The wind whispered again, curling around my ears like a lullaby. From then on, the forest became my classroom. Each path held a lesson, each creature a teacher. The fox taught me how to walk silently, the owl, how to see through shadow. Even the mushrooms, with their odd shapes and silent patience, taught me how to wait. Not all lessons were easy, of course. One day, I tried to charm a stone to glow so I could read after dark. Instead, it burst into green flame and singed my eyebrows clean off. Mama laughed for a full hour, then brewed a balm to fix them. "Mistakes are how magic remembers you," she said, tapping my nose. I grew braver after that. By the time I turned 10, I could charm raindrops to form shapes in the air, coax roots to rise and form tiny bridges across puddles, and even call moths to dance in spirals around my lantern. But my favorite spell was still the Whispering Wind. Every time I sent my secret into the breeze, I imagined it landing somewhere far away. Maybe to another witchling like me, or a lonely crow in need of a friend, or even the moon herself, who always looked like she was listening. Then came the day everything changed. It was the evening of the autumn equinox, and Mama said I would perform my first solo rite, a tradition among witches when they reached 11 years. You'll make your circle beneath the hollow tree, she said, brushing a pine needle from my hair, and ask the forest to accept you as its own. I was nervous. The hollow tree was older than any story, said to be carved by the first witch herself. It stood in a quiet glen where time moved slower, where even birds hushed their songs. That twilight, with my spellbook tucked under my arm and my hands full of offerings, acorns, honeycomb, and a braid of my own hair, I stepped into the glen. The tree stood before me, its bark gnarled and silvered by ages. Its hollow yawned like a mouth. I drew a circle in the earth with a sprig of ash wood and stepped inside. My heart thundered. I am of the forest, I began, my voice shaking like a leaf. I come not to take, but to learn, to listen, to serve. Will you have me? There was no sound but my own breath. Then, all at once, the wind stirred. Leaves swirled in a spiral, circling the tree, circling me. The hollow glowed faintly, and the roots beneath my feet trembled, just a little. And I heard it. Not with my ears, but in my bones. A voice like moss growing and water dripping in caves. Welcome, child. My knees buckled. Tears pricked my eyes. I pressed my forehead to the ground. That night, I slept beneath the hollow tree, wrapped in moss and moonlight. I dreamed of ancient witches walking through fog, their laughter like chimes. I dreamed of a path that stretched far ahead, waiting for me to walk it. When I woke, my spellbook had changed. A new page had appeared, one I didn't write. It read, Chapter 1. The Witch Who Listened. And beneath that, a single word in Mama's handwriting, begin. The morning after the rite, the air was unusually still. Even the birds seemed to tiptoe across the branches. My limbs felt heavy from sleeping on the forest floor, but something had shifted inside me. It was like a tiny thread had been tied from my heart to the world around me. I stood and stretched beneath the hollow tree, noticing how the sunlight filtered through its branches, casting spirals on the grass. My spellbook lay beside me, open to that new page, one I hadn't written. It was real. The forest had answered. And now, the journey had begun. When I returned to the cottage, Mama was already brewing something rich and spicy. Cinnamon, rosemary, and a hint of pepper hung in the air. She didn't say anything at first, just gave me a long look and then slid a bowl of warm porridge across the table. You have the look, she said at last. What look? I asked, spoon halfway to my mouth. The one witches wear after speaking to something older than time. She smiled softly. The look of someone who's just been claimed. I didn't quite know what to say, so I just nodded and ate my porridge. It tasted like nutmeg and comfort. That afternoon, Mama gave me a gift. It was wrapped in linen and smelled faintly of cedar. When I opened it, I gasped. Inside was a broom, not a toy, not a branch lashed with twine like the ones I played with as a child. This one was real, hand-carved, oak wood. The bristles were bound with silver wire, and tiny runes were etched along the handle. A bell was tied just below the bristles, its chime soft and secretive. This was mine, once, Mama said, placing a hand on my shoulder. It's time you had a broom of your own. I held it carefully, like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. Does it fly? I whispered. Only if it trusts you. That evening, we practiced together in the clearing behind the cottage. Mama showed me how to mount, how to balance, and most importantly, how to listen. The broom isn't just a tool, she said. It's a companion. It needs to know who you are. At first, it wouldn't even twitch beneath me. I sat on it awkwardly, legs dangling, feeling more silly than magical. Mama watched with that quiet, knowing look of hers. I tried everything, chants, charms, even pleading. Nothing worked. Finally, I sat down beside the broom and told it a story. About how I whispered to the wind and met the hollow tree. About how I wanted to protect the forest, to learn its secrets. My voice grew quiet. And I want to fly, not just to fly, but to feel what it's like to be part of the sky. The broom shifted. Just a little. Enough for the bell to ring. I blinked, heart racing. Again, Mama whispered. So I told it more. About my dreams, my fears, the time I turned a mushroom into a teacup by accident. I laughed. And the broom laughed too, or at least, it trembled like it did. Then, as if it had always known me, it lifted into the air. Only a foot off the ground, but enough to send my stomach flipping with joy. I clung to the handle and let out a small, breathless cheer. You did it, Mama called. The broom knows your name now. That night, I slept with it beside my bed. The next few weeks were filled with flying lessons. Nothing high, not yet, just gliding above the garden, weaving between trees, learning how to dip and roll without crashing into the coop. I named the broom Bristle, and I think it liked that. I also began crafting my first solo spells. Simple things. A charm to make tea never burn your tongue. A trinket that made your voice louder if you were feeling shy. A glow pebble that softly lit up whenever you held your breath. Mama made me record everything in the back pages of my spellbook. This is your magic, she'd say. Your path. Every spell you write becomes a footprint behind you. Sometimes I got frustrated. When a potion boiled over or a charm fizzled out, I'd scowl and throw myself into bed, cheeks hot with embarrassment. Mama never scolded. She'd simply sit by the fire and sing until I came out on my own. One day, she said something I'll never forget. You are not expected to be perfect, only to be present. Magic is a lifelong conversation, not a test. I wrote that in big letters on the inside of my spellbook's cover. Soon, word of my growing magic reached the forest. Small creatures began to visit. A family of hedgehogs came for an enchantment to keep their den warm. A nervous frog asked for help singing louder in the evenings. I even caught a wisp watching me from the edge of the woods, though it vanished before I could greet it. My favorite visitor was an old crow with one white feather. He perched on the windowsill each morning, cawing 3 times until I gave him a crust of bread. Eventually, he let me tie a ribbon to his leg. I called him Ink. One foggy morning, Ink returned with a note. It was scrawled in spidery writing and smelled faintly of fennel. It read, "To the young witch of the Elderwood, you are invited to the gathering of saplings, held under the 3rd moon of the season. Bring your broom, your bell, and your heart wide open." The circle my breath caught. The gathering. I had heard whispers of it from Mema, an ancient meeting of all the young witches from the surrounding forests, hills, and marshlands. A place to trade spells, share stories, and test the strength of your craft. When I showed Mema the note, she simply nodded. It's time. The 3rd moon was only a week away. I spent those days preparing like never before. I polished Bristle until it gleamed, packed herbs into little satchels, practiced every spell I'd ever written, and even added a few new ones, like one that summoned a soft rain cloud for shade, and another that made berries sweeten faster. On the eve of my departure, Mama gave me one last gift, a small silver bell on a chain. "This is your bell," she said. "Every witch has one. It calls what is lost and guards what is dear. Ring it when you feel alone." I wore it around my neck as I flew into the night, heart trembling with excitement and fear. Ahead of me, through the dark branches, the moon glowed full and round, and somewhere beyond the trees, other young witches were flying too, bells ringing softly like stars. The sky was full of witches. Not the kind in dark cloaks and crooked hats, but children like me, each weaving through the clouds on brooms of ashen willow, cedar, and birch. Some flew solo, quiet as shadows. Others zipped in flocks, their laughter trailing behind like ribbons. The full moon glowed above, watching us with one great silver eye. Below, the forest stretched out in ripples, a blanket of black and deep green stitched with rivers and stones. Somewhere, tucked in its folds, the gathering waited. My broom, Bristle, flew smooth and steady beneath me. The little bell on the handle chimed gently with the wind, matching the beat of my heart. I wore my best moss-green cloak, a pouch of charms at my belt, and Mama's silver bell tucked safe against my collarbone. Ahead, I saw it. The clearing. It shimmered like moonlight on water, wide and ringed with trees older than memory. 1,000 soft lights hovered above it, floating lanterns, will-o'-the-wisps, glowing moths. Witchlings were landing one by one, their brooms settling onto moss as if returning home. As I descended, I noticed the shapes carved into the stones circling the clearing, runes for listening, growth, fire, and flight. This was no ordinary glade. It was alive with memory. I stepped from my broom, and the moment my feet touched the moss, the ground hummed. A warm welcome. You made it. I turned. A girl stood behind me, freckles, short hair like dandelion fluff, and a broom tied with feathers. I'm Lark, she said, holding out her hand. From the stormroot pines. I smiled shyly. I'm Thistle. Elderwood Hollow. Ooh, fancy forest, she teased, grinning. You brought your bell? I nodded and held it up. She tapped hers, a small black one shaped like a crow's beak. Together, we walked into the heart of the gathering. There were dozens of us. Maybe 100. Some witches were older, near 16, with long cloaks and confident stares. Others looked even younger than I was, gripping their brooms like lifelines. Everyone carried something, herb pouches, potion bottles, familiars curled on shoulders. One girl even had a glowing toad in a sling. We were called together in a circle by the fire keepers, tall witches in robes of stars and roots, their bells deep and steady. One of them, with long braids and a voice like distant thunder, raised her hands. Welcome, saplings, she said. You have flown far and dared much. Tonight, you gather not to prove, but to share. Magic is not hoarded. It is sung, remembered, offered. A wind passed through us, cool and gentle. My bell chimed once on its own. Then the gathering began. There were events, challenges, but not competitions. Just ways to show what we had learned. First came the potion test. Cauldrons were set out in a spiral, and we were each given a list of ingredients: thistle bloom, moon salt, river bark, ashberry. The goal was to brew something true. True. What did that mean? I chose a small cauldron and added each ingredient slowly. My hands trembled a little, but I tried to remember Mama's voice. Spells are songs. Don't rush the tune. Instead of following the exact list, I listened. I dropped in a feather from my pouch. A bit of the moss from the hollow tree. A whisper of wind I caught in a vial last week. I stirred widdershins and sang softly under my breath. The potion turned violet. Not flashy. Not bubbly. But when I breathed it in, I felt calm. Like a deep breath after a long cry. Lark, beside me, had made something that floated. She laughed as it lifted the ladle into the air. Next was the familiar's walk. I didn't bring a familiar, Mima said mine hadn't found me yet, but that was okay. Those of us without one walked the path with a lantern and a single question in our hearts. Mine was, where does my magic belong? The path wound through the trees, lit only by the moons above and the glow from our lanterns. Some witchlings returned with creatures by their sides, a fox, a beetle, a smoky little spirit shaped like a squirrel. I returned alone. but my lantern flickered with gold. I think something saw me. Maybe it just wasn't time yet. After that came the spell trade. We gathered by the stone circle and took turns casting simple spells we'd made ourselves, offering them to the group. The rule was, for every spell you gave, you could learn one in return. I stood, clutching my pouch, and offered my spell for softening heavy hearts, a charm tied with rosemary and milkweed silk. I called it Moth's Embrace. In return, I learned Lark's spell for calling back dreams that had slipped away. It used crushed mint, a drop of honey, and a pebble warmed under your pillow. She called it Dream's Return. By night's end, my book was heavier, but my heart lighter. We sat by the central fire as stars danced above. Someone brought out a harp. Another played a bone flute. We sang songs of rivers and sky, of ash trees and storms. I curled up with Bristle at my side and Lark leaning against my shoulder. "You think you'll come next year?" she asked sleepily. "If the forest lets me," I murmured. She laughed softly. "I hope it does." Later, when the fire had quieted and most witchlings had drifted into dreams, I stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. The wind moved gently, brushing my hair from my face. I rang my bell. Once. Softly. From the trees, something stirred. A pair of eyes blinked at me, golden, low to the ground. Then a small shape padded forward. It was a fox, but not an ordinary one. Its fur shimmered like moonlight on frost, and its tail was tipped with silver. It looked at me, not with fear, but recognition. I knelt. "You're late," I whispered. The fox tilted its head. Then, very calmly, it walked forward and placed its paw on my knee. And just like that, I knew. This was my familiar. I named him Solace, because that's what he felt like. Not just a familiar, not just a creature of magic, but a quiet kind of knowing. The way he moved beside me, silent and soft-footed, like a hush in the wind, wasn't just clever. It was comforting. Like he'd been waiting all along. Solace didn't speak, of course, not with words, but his presence was clear. I could feel him like a thread through my chest. We shared thoughts in pieces, scent, image, emotion. When I wondered if he liked the name, he showed me a picture of me stroking his ears beneath stars. And that was answer enough. The morning after the gathering, I left the glade with Lark and a few others. We flew side by side as the sun rose behind us, pink and sleepy-eyed. The other witches peeled away one by one, returning to their forests and caves and hills. I waved as they dipped out of the sky. When Elderwood appeared below me, I felt my chest tighten. Not with worry, but with something like longing. I hadn't realized how much I missed the sound of the wind in our trees. I missed the bubbling brook, the smell of sage by the windowsill, the soft chime of bells in the rafters. Mama was waiting in the garden. I landed in a tumble of leaves and excitement, practically falling off my broom with Solace trotting at my heels. "Mama," I cried. She looked up from her weeding, eyes crinkling with pride and knowing. "I see you didn't come back alone." Solace trotted forward and, after a careful sniff, let Mama scratch behind his ears. That meant everything. Over warm oatcakes and lavender tea, I told her everything. The potion test, Lark's floating ladle, the spell trade, how I'd walked the familiar's path and found nothing, until Solace appeared by the fire. "I think he was waiting," I whispered. Mama nodded. Familiars don't answer summons. They follow callings. That night, I wrote pages and pages in my spellbook. Every memory I could squeeze into ink. Every face, every bell chime, every note of the bone flute. Solace lay across my feet while I scribbled, snoring quietly. The next few weeks were different. Quieter, but deeper somehow. Solace followed me everywhere. into the garden, through the woods, even to the loft where I kept my herbs. When I studied, he curled beneath my chair. When I practiced spells, he sat with his ears perked, alert to every flicker of magic. And something curious began to happen. My spells changed. Not in big, obvious ways, but in texture, in shape. My enchantments grew gentler, subtler. They whispered instead of shouting. My spell to dry clothes in the rain now also left the scent of rosemary. My charm to find lost things no longer buzzed, it simply tugged your feet toward where you needed to go. It was as though solace wove his calm into my magic. Mama noticed. "You're growing into your own school," she said. "My what?" "Your school of magic. Every witch eventually finds their shape. Some follow storm paths, loud and sudden. Some grow like vines, slow, deep-rooted. Others heal. Others shape. You," she smiled. "You are becoming a witch of soft returns." I liked the sound of that. One afternoon, while gathering mistletoe in the glen, I heard rustling in the bramble. Solace froze, ears stiff. Then a voice called, "Thistle." Lark emerged, cloak muddy, cheeks wind-bitten, but eyes bright. "You live near a talking oak, right? With the swing?" I nodded, stunned. "You found me?" She grinned and pulled a letter from her satchel. "Sort of. The crow with the ribbon helped. Ink. Of course." The letter was from another witchling, a boy named Rue who made glow ink from squid berries. He'd written to thank me for the dream recall spell and included one of his own, a way to make flowers bloom from shadows. It was written in pale orange script that shimmered when I tilted the page. Lark flopped down beside me, pulled out a bruised apple, and said, "So, want to trade again?" That became the beginning of our shared spell circle. Every month, a few of us from the gathering wrote or visited or sent enchanted letters with birds, bees, and once even a determined beetle. We swapped spells, told stories, shared dreams. Our little circle grew, first 5, then 9, then 12 of us. We called ourselves the Threading Ring. We weren't officially anything. Just friends who remembered that night by the moonfire. But each of us carried a tiny charm, a ring made of thread, waxed in bee skin and sealed with a sigil of our choosing. Mine had the hollow tree carved into it. With Solace at my side, I began to understand something Memar had said long ago: magic isn't what you can do. It's what you care for. So I started caring more. For the mushrooms growing behind the coop. For the robin that always knocked on the window when I left crumbs. For the shy girl who lived downriver and thought she wasn't magical enough because her spells didn't sparkle. I gave her a pebble that warmed when you held it. It made her cry. Then she hugged me and laughed at the same time. I learned to listen not just to wind and earth, but to people, to moments, to small things. One morning, I awoke to find Solace sitting at the foot of my bed, staring out the window. There was snow on the sill. Our first frost. Solace looked back at me, and I felt the tug again. Not the gentle hum of our bond, but something deeper. A pull. A calling. It was time to travel again. The snow came quiet. No storm, no howling wind, just a soft breath over the hollow, like the forest had exhaled in its sleep. When I opened the window, the world was white. The trees wore cloaks of frost. The brook, still murmuring beneath its icy crust, sparkled like it had swallowed stars. Solace sat on the windowsill, his silver-tipped tail twitching. His golden eyes watched the far edge of the woods, where the path turned toward the forgotten pine glen. Something was calling. I'd felt it all night in my dreams, a voice made of wind and frost, repeating a name that wasn't mine but felt familiar. It wasn't a word, not really, it was a pulse. A beckoning. Mama called it the witch's thrum. When I padded downstairs, she was already awake, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her face turned toward the hearth. She didn't ask why I was up so early. She just looked at me, then at Solace, and nodded. "Take your cloak," she said. "And the dream mirror." I tucked the little round mirror into my pouch. It had a back carved from bone and a surface made of something between water and glass. You could use it to see places you'd only imagined or places that were trying to remember you. I saddled up Bristle, my broom, brushed the frost from the handle, and climbed on. Solace leapt up behind me like he'd done it 100 times. We rose into the cold air, the snowflakes swirling around us like soft feathers. We flew toward the pine glen. The trees here were different, tall and ancient, their bark dark as ink, their needles sharp as whispers. No birds called here. No wind rustled the boughs. Just the quiet crunch of snow under Bristle's landing and the warm sound of Solace's breath in the cold. There, at the center of the glen, stood something I'd never seen before. A door. Not attached to anything. No frame, no wall. Just a tall wooden door with a frost-covered handle, planted in the ground like a tree that had grown the wrong way. Runes were carved into its surface, circles, spirals, and crescent moons. At its base was a sign written in curling script. "For those who hear the thrum." I stepped forward. My bell rang. Not loudly, but like a sigh. A single, soft note. Solace tilted his head. The door opened. Behind it was not more forest, not sky, not even darkness. It was a long hallway made of mirrors, each one fogged with breath, as though someone had just stepped away from them. The air smelled like old stories. We stepped through. The mirrors showed glimpses of places I didn't recognize. Floating houses on lakes of gold, gardens where plants whispered secrets, staircases winding up into the stars. Every step brought a new image, like the mirrors were flipping pages in a book. Then one of the mirrors cleared. It showed me, not the me of now, but the me of some maybe, standing tall in a cloak made of moth wings, surrounded by witches, my silver bell glowing with light. My hair was longer. My eyes sharper. My voice was speaking, though I couldn't hear the words. Solace bumped against my leg. "Is that where I'm going?" I whispered. The mirror fogged again. We walked until the hall ended in a round chamber lit by floating candles. In the center, a pedestal held a single object, a folded letter sealed with wax. The symbol stamped on it matched the one on my thread ring. The threading ring had sent this. I opened it. "Dear Thistle, if this reached you, it means you heard it too," the frost call. We felt it from all corners. Something is waking beneath the snows, something older than our threads. Lark saw it in a dream. Rue heard it in the flames. It's asking for us. We don't think it's danger. We think it's memory. Meet us where the moons cross paths, the crosslight hollow. On the solstice. Bring solace. Bring your bell. Bring who you've become. With warmth, wax, and whispers, the threading ring my breath caught. I looked at Solace. He just blinked, as if to say, "Of course we're going." The room faded as we stepped back through the door. I expected the mirrors to show more strange places, but they didn't. They showed only the forest. My forest. The path back to Elderwood. The door closed behind us. When we returned, the sky had shifted afternoon now, the sun shining off the snow in sparkles. Mama stood at the garden gate, watching, as if she'd known exactly where I'd gone. She didn't speak, just opened her arms. I hugged her tightly. She whispered, "You're part of something now, aren't you?" I nodded. I think I always was. But now it knows me back. That night, under the silver hush of the moon, I lay in bed with Solace curled beside me. The letter rested on my chest. The frost still clung to the window, but inside I was warm. The solstice was coming, and with it, something waiting to be remembered. The solstice was a breath away. Each day that passed, the sun rose lower and slipped away quicker, like it was growing tired of holding up the sky. The light turned soft and golden, painting long shadows over the snow. Elderwood Hollow quieted too, animals slept in dens, and even the wind seemed to whisper rather than sing. But inside me, something stirred brighter and brighter. The threading ring was gathering again. This time not for play, or practice, or potion contests, but for something older. Something the frost had remembered. The letter's words repeated in my head each night. Bring who you've become. Mama helped me pack. She didn't ask too many questions. She just handed me jars of dried lemon balm, pressed rowan bark between cloth, and folded a shawl she'd enchanted to keep out the bite of the cold. You won't need much, she said. Only what's true. I tucked in my bell, now warm from many spells. My dream mirror. A flask of thistle tea. And at the last moment, I slipped in a pebble that hummed softly when I held it, lark's spell for finding joy after fear. We took off before dawn. Solace leapt onto bristle with practiced ease, curling his tail around my waist as we rose into the still dark sky. Above us, 2 moons glowed in the clouds, one silver, one pale blue, crossing paths like sisters linking arms. Their light poured down through the clouds in twin beams. That was the sign. The Crosslight Hollow could only be found under the moon's embrace. A place hidden from ordinary time. It was older than maps. You had to follow instinct, not stars. I followed the bell. It rang once every few heartbeats, not aloud, but through the air around me, soft pulses that tugged us gently this way and that. Like sonar, or a song half remembered. Other witchlings joined along the way. Lark flew up beside me on her broom, waving with frost in her lashes. Rue wasn't far behind, his cloak sparkling with glow dust. Others arrived in spirals and streaks of smoke, witchlings from glades and hills, riverbanks and caves. Some had familiars curled on their shoulders. Some wore cloaks stitched with runes. All of them carried their bells. We landed together. The Crosslight Hollow was not a clearing, not exactly. It was more like a breath in the forest, a wide space where the trees bent gently outward and the snow lay untouched. Pillars of stone encircled it, carved with symbols that shimmered when the moons touched them. And at the center stood an arch of woven branches. No roots, no nails, just living wood, twisted together in a doorway that led to nothing and everything. We gathered around it. A hush settled. Even the wind paused. Then a figure stepped forward. She was older than us, maybe 18, with a cloak the color of storm clouds and hair like winter wheat. I didn't know her name, but I knew the power in her voice. The Hollow has called us, she said. Not to fight, not to fix, but to remember. Something beneath the frost has waited long, and it remembers magic we've forgotten. She raised her bell and rang it once. It echoed through the trees, not loud, but deep, like it was shaking the air from inside our bones. One by one, we followed. Through the arch. Into the dream place. It was a forest, but not like ours. The trees were crystalline, their branches casting rainbows. The snow was warm underfoot, and stars hung low, close enough to touch. Time didn't feel right here. Everything shimmered at the edges. We weren't alone. Shapes moved between the trees, not creatures, but memories. Glowing impressions. A witch casting a circle of fire in the snow. Another planting a glowing seed into the heart of a mountain. Children singing a lullaby that turned into a spell to hold back a storm. Each vision drifted near, then melted into mist. Then came the hollow sound again. A bell, but not one of ours. It rang from somewhere deeper. Beneath the dream place, we followed the sound, down paths that didn't exist before we stepped on them, over bridges made of woven light, past frozen lakes that reflected not faces, but fears. At last, we reached the well. It was carved from dark stone, wide and deep, rimmed with silver moss. And from it came the bell's hum, low and steady. Not an alarm. A heartbeat. There was something at the bottom. A silence that wanted speaking. A story waiting for voice. The older witch knelt beside it. So did Lark. Then Rue. One by one, all of us. We held our bells over the edge and rang them. The sound passed down, down, into the dark. And the dark answered. The well filled with light, not fast, not blinding, but slow and sure. Like honey warming. Shapes rose from the depths, not people, not monsters, but moments. 1,000 spells passed hand to hand. Forgotten songs. Ways to call rain. Ways to stitch sleep into blankets. The magic of kindness. The magic of remembering. A spell formed in my mouth, unbidden. I whispered it into the well. Come back to us, little light. The others did too. Whispers in 100 voices, layered like wind through pine. The light swirled up, warm and thick. And when it touched us, it didn't burn, it blessed. I felt it soak into my skin, my bones, my bell. My spellbook tingled in my pouch. A new spell had been written. One without ink. The well quieted. The visions faded. But the memory stayed. We left the dream place hand in hand, our bells quiet now, but fuller somehow. We didn't need to say goodbye. The threading ring was never truly apart. Back at Elderwood, Mama met me at the gate. She touched my bell. It's warmer now. I nodded. There's more inside. She smiled. And more in you. That night, as snow fell soft and slow, Solace and I sat by the fire. I opened my spellbook, turned to a blank page, and wrote one thing. For when you need to remember who you are. And underneath it, no words. Just a space for silence. Winter lingered like a quiet guest. The days were short and silver. The nights were longer than stories. Even the animals moved more gently, as if the whole hollow had taken a deep breath and decided not to exhale too quickly. I didn't mind. I liked the stillness. It gave my thoughts room to stretch. After the Crosslight Hollow, everything felt a little different, brighter, but not in the way of lanterns or firelight. It was more like something had opened. The well's light still lived inside me, not as a roar, not even as a hum. It was more like a memory I hadn't made yet, a warmth that waited in the corners of things. I began noticing how spells would shift depending on how I felt them. If I whispered an old charm with a smile, it bloomed differently. If I braided a wish into a vine while thinking of someone I missed, the vine grew twice as fast. Mama said it meant I was learning empathic magic, where your emotions guided the shape. It's not about control, she explained. It's about invitation. Solace had grown more attuned too. His golden eyes would flick toward a spot before I noticed something strange. He began waking me seconds before the kettle whistled. Once, he led me into the woods just in time to catch a faint shimmer in the air, a message from Lark in the shape of a moth made of wind. Her note simply said, "Do you ever feel like you're glowing and no one else sees it?" I did. Sometimes, I would sit by the frozen stream and hum the melody we'd chanted at the well. I didn't know the words, it didn't have any, but the tune stayed curled up behind my ribs. And whenever I hummed it, the water glowed faintly under the ice. One morning, while I was gathering frost petals for tea, I heard something unusual, laughter. Not the kind that echoed through the woods like a trick, but genuine, surprised laughter. It came from the path. A girl stood there, bundled in a too-big coat, her nose red from cold. She looked about my age, though a little taller, and was staring at a patch of snow that had suddenly sprouted little flowers of light. "Oh," she gasped when she noticed me. "Was that you?" I smiled. "Maybe. Was that you laughing?" She blushed. "I'm Juniper. I live up the ridge. My aunt said not to come this far. Said the woods here were strange. Only the parts that want to be," I said. Solace stepped forward and sniffed her boots. She knelt, holding out her fingers. "Hello, Silver Paws." He licked them once and turned in a circle of approval. Juniper and I sat on a log while I brewed the frost petals into tea. She told me she wasn't a witch, not really. She couldn't charm a broom or speak to crows or even keep a candle lit with a spell. But when she hummed to her chickens, they laid twice as many eggs. "That sounds like magic to me," I said. She shrugged. "It doesn't feel like magic. Just comfort." "Comfort is magic," I said. We watched the snowflakes fall and melt into steam from the mugs. Before she left, I gave her one of Lark's joy pebbles. "Hold it when the world feels too sharp," I told her. She squeezed it, and her eyes grew glassy. No one's ever given me magic before. I wanted to tell her that she'd had it all along, but maybe she needed to discover that herself. After she left, I felt the spell again. The wordless one. It buzzed just under my skin. It hadn't stopped since the solstice. Only now it was changing, gathering shape, like a snowflake forming crystal by crystal. That night, as I lay in bed with Solace curled against my feet, I whispered, "Should I write it down?" He didn't move. I picked up my spellbook and opened to the blank page with the line I'd written after the hollow, "For when you need to remember who you are." This time, I placed my hand on the page and closed my eyes. I didn't try to force the words. I just let them come. Not from my mind. From the glow. When I opened my eyes, the page was still blank. But my hand tingled, and the ink shimmered faintly in lines I couldn't read. Invisible ink. Dream script. A spell not meant for the eyes, but for the self. I closed the book and set it on the shelf. The next day, Mama took me to the market in Thistlewade, the closest village to our hollow. It was the last gathering before the deep sleep, when many witches tucked away for the coldest weeks, letting the world rest. Market stalls bustled with enchanted scarves, cinnamon-barked firewood, and dreamweaver charms. I traded a sun-baked stone for a vial of star ink. One vendor gave me a tiny book that sang lullabies when opened. Another handed me a round, wax-sealed envelope. "For the witchling of Elderwood," she said. It arrived with the snow. It was another letter from the threading ring. This one read, "There are whispers of a winterroot waking in the south, a spirit tree that remembers when witches first sang to the frost. It only wakes for those who walk the wordless spell. Do you feel it too?" Lark asterisk I did. So did Solace. And I knew, without a doubt, that our next path was already growing, quietly, beneath the snow. The letter from Lark stayed warm in my pocket for 3 days. Not from heat, but from meaning. That's how threading ring messages worked. Magic woven into paper, stitched with spell thoughts that hummed until you understood them. And I understood this one. The winterroot was waking. I'd heard whispers about it in old stories, a great spirit tree buried deep beneath the snow, asleep for centuries. Witches said it was the first tree to listen when we sang, that its branches reached into the memory of the land itself. If you stood in its presence, they said, it could show you your beginning. Not where you were born, but where your thread first tugged the world. I needed to find it. So, on the morning of the year's coldest night, I packed my pouch with the wordless spell, the invisible ink page, the star ink I'd traded for, and a small stone that whispered directions when held to the ear. Mama wrapped me in 3 layers of cloaks and kissed my forehead. She didn't say be careful. She just whispered, let the silence teach you. Solace and I set off on Bristle, flying low where the trees kept the wind gentle. The hollow behind us disappeared into soft fog. Before us, the southwoods waited. These trees were older than ours, tall and silent, with trunks so wide you could live in one if you wanted. The snow was thick and undisturbed. No birds, no tracks, just the clean hush of a world listening. I followed the pull of the pebble, then the hum of my bell. They guided me through narrowing paths, past frozen rivers, over stones carved with half-worn runes. Everything felt expectant. We reached a grove where the trees grew in a circle, their branches bare but glimmering with frost that sparkled in patterns, spirals, rings, stars. The air was still, but not lifeless. It felt like holding your breath just before a spell is cast. Solace leapt down and sniffed the snow. I pressed my hand to the ground. It was warm. The winter root was underneath us. I closed my eyes. The spell with no words fluttered up in my chest like a moth. I didn't speak. I didn't chant. I just felt it, like a song stuck behind your heartbeat. My bell rang once, softly. The snow in the center of the grove began to glow. A crack formed, not sharp, not sudden, but gentle. The earth opened like a petal, revealing a spiral staircase carved into roots. Each step pulsed faintly, lit from within by a greenish light. I descended slowly, Solace beside me. The deeper we went, the warmer it grew, not fire warm, but memory warm. Like stepping into a sunbeam that remembered your name. At the bottom, the winter root waited. It was immense, its trunk thicker than a tower, its bark smooth and pale like driftwood. It rose through the cavern and beyond. Around it, thousands of fine root threads reached out like veins, pulsing with a soft silver glow. I stepped closer. My bell rang again, this time louder. A ripple passed through the roots. Then it spoke. Not in words, in knowing. It sent images into my mind, a girl standing by a frozen stream, her breath visible in the air as she whispered a lullaby that held back winter. A young witch touching her first thread of power. A grandmother passing a spell-laced spoon to a child. Lark's laughter echoing over starlit fields. And then it showed me, but not the me I knew. A younger me, even smaller, standing in front of a broken mirror, holding a bell that hadn't yet been born. I was humming. The same hum from the well, the wordless song. The winter root was remembering me, and I was remembering it. I stepped forward and placed my palm against the bark. The spell that had waited so long unfurled from my skin, wrapping around the trunk in waves. The bark lit up beneath my touch, glowing in that same invisible ink now made visible, dream script forming symbols that pulsed like heartbeat. The tree sighed. Not a sound, not air, but a feeling. Peace. And then it offered something. From one of its glowing roots, a bud opened and out grew a bell. Small, translucent, carved from living crystal. It trembled as if alive. I reached for it and heard the winterroot's final gift, a thought. When you cannot speak, let this sing. I took the bell. Solace meowed softly, and I could feel he heard it too. The tree dimmed again, returning to sleep, and the cavern gently pushed us back toward the stairs. We rose quietly. The snow closed behind us. And I knew. Whatever this crystal bell was, it wasn't for spells. It was for reminding the world of softness, of beginnings, of what came before magic was spoken aloud. We flew home under silver skies, frost catching in my eyelashes. I didn't need to write anything in my spellbook that night. The bell had already written it into me. The crystal bell didn't make a sound. Not like a regular bell, not like my old copper one that chimed when I cast or sang or spun joy into herbs. This one didn't ring when touched or shaken. It didn't even hum unless I listened with my heart instead of my ears. Still, I wore it around my neck. Solace would bump it gently with his nose in the morning, his tail flicking with curiosity. I watched the way the light bent around it, how frost wouldn't form where it hung, how shadows seemed to pause when I passed through them. It was more than a bell. It was a reminder of who I was before I knew what being a witch meant. Of the silence before the first spell. I didn't understand it, not fully, but that was all right. Some magic doesn't ask to be understood. It only asks to be held. One night, I dreamed of the Crosslight Hollow again. Except it wasn't winter anymore. The trees were in full blossom, petals falling like stars, and all the witchlings stood in a wide circle. Lark was humming. Rue was sketching glowing runes into the sky. Someone whispered, "She brought the bell back." I opened my hand, and there it was, the crystal bell, but this time, it pulsed with tiny lights inside it. Like a galaxy had been caught in glass. Then a shadow fell across the dream. Not a figure, just a feeling. A sudden cold. The petals stopped falling. And then I woke. It was still dark outside. The snow was silent. But I felt something wrong. Solace was already sitting up, his ears twitching, tail stiff. I slipped from bed, bell in hand, and padded to the window. A shape moved at the edge of the hollow, just between the trees. Too tall for a fox, too slow for a deer. It flickered between one place and another, there, not there, then there again. Not walking, not flying, just drifting. My heart thudded. I wrapped myself in my thickest cloak, laced my boots, and crept outside. The snow was powder soft, muffling every footstep. Moonlight spilled across the path, and I followed it toward the woods where I'd seen the shape. As I passed the old yew tree, my bell warmed. I looked down. It glowed faintly. Not white, not gold. Something in between. The kind of color you can only see when you close your eyes. I stepped into the trees, and the forest was wrong. Not broken, not poisoned, just hushed, like someone had pressed a finger to the mouth of the world. I held the bell tightly. The shape appeared again. This time, it was closer. It looked like a girl, but not. She shimmered, her outline rippling like steam above boiling water. Her eyes were wide and clouded. She moved like a wind caught in a loop, always circling, always on the edge of vanishing. When she saw me, she flinched, but didn't run. I spoke gently. "Are you lost?" No reply. The bell warmed more. I raised it and held it forward. It pulsed once, twice. Then a tone rang out, not loud, not high, just present. Like the sound of your own heartbeat when you lie in bed too long. A memory made noise. The girl shape paused, and suddenly she was clearer. Her eyes were younger now, no longer clouded, and her voice came not from her lips but from the space between us. "I was a witchling once," she whispered. "I followed the thread too deep. I didn't speak, just listened. I found a spell with no words," she said. "But I was afraid of forgetting, so I tried to trap it. I wrote it into mirrors, into frost, into wind, and the spell turned on itself. Now I echo. I remember, but only just enough to hurt." I stepped closer. "You're not trapped. You're unfinished." The bell rang again. This time, the snow around us lifted, not melted, but rose, tiny flakes floating upward as if weightless. The trees pulsed with that same dreamlight from the winter root. "Will you unwrite me?" the girl asked, voice small. "No," I said. "I'll sing you back." And I did. I didn't use notes or words, just the hum from the hollow, the lullaby with no lyrics, the vibration that lived under everything true. The bell joined in. Its tone rose gently, wrapping around her like a shawl made of memory. The shimmer around her stilled. Her eyes filled with light. And then she smiled. Not a ghost smile. Not a sad one. The kind of smile you give when something finally makes sense after a long, long time. Her outline dissolved into flakes of frost that shimmered once, then disappeared like the last sigh of winter. Peace settled in her place. The bell cooled. Solace wound around my ankles, soft and purring. I knelt in the snow and whispered thanks. Not to the bell, not even to the girl, just to magic. Because it had reminded me that not all lost things are meant to be found. Some are meant to be finished. The day after the bell sang the echo girl home, the snow thawed just enough to reveal things long hidden. Moss peeked out from under the stones. My breath didn't fog quite as quickly. Even the birds, quiet all winter, returned in small choirs of chirps, reminding the hollow that the world hadn't ended, only rested. But I felt different. I kept reaching for the crystal bell even when it didn't ring. It was like part of me now, like a scar that shimmered instead of stung. Solace noticed. He began curling beside me more, watching me not with curiosity, but caution. The kind you offer someone who's been somewhere they can't quite explain. I tried to write about the girl in my spellbook, but every time I began, the words slipped away. Not forgotten, just not meant to be told yet. That morning, I wandered the hollow's edge with no plan, only the hush of thaw beneath my boots. Then I felt the pull. Not like the bell. Not like the pebble path or lark's whisper letters. This was weaving magic, the quiet sensation that something somewhere had opened, and a thread had slipped free. If you followed it, something would answer. So I followed it. It led me to the grove behind the mushroom ring, where the birches grew in crooked spirals. Most witches avoided that place. It was said the spirals pulled at your thoughts. But I liked them. They reminded me that even crooked things could grow toward the light. Beneath one of the trees was a nest. Not a bird's nest. Not twigs or grass. It was made entirely of glass. Not just clear glass, either. Colored shards. Green, red, soft blue. Slivers shaped like drops and moons and petals. It sparkled like it had caught pieces of the sky and forgotten to give them back. I crouched beside it and didn't touch. It didn't feel dangerous, just delicate. In the center of the nest was a small egg, smooth and black, with a single spiral drawn in white across its surface. "Who do you belong to?" I whispered. The bell at my neck pulsed once. So I did the only thing that made sense. I sat beside the nest and waited. The trees sighed. The wind turned. And the egg cracked. Just a little. Not with violence, but with need. Something inside it was waking. Something that had been waiting longer than I'd been alive. The bell rang. Soft. Steady. The spiral on the egg began to glow. And out hatched a bird. But not a bird. It had no feathers, just soft shimmering down like dandelion fluff. Its eyes were closed. Its beak gleamed silver. It made no sound, but I could feel it humming. It pulsed in time with the bell. I reached out slowly, and it stepped onto my palm. It was warm, and then it opened its eyes. They were not bird eyes. They were old. Older than the hollow. Older than the winter root. They looked at me like I was a chapter in a book it hadn't yet read, but already loved. Solace crept up beside me and stared at it. Then, very slowly, bowed his head. I blinked. "I think you're not a bird at all," I whispered. The hatchling closed its eyes and curled into my hand like a sleeping flame. I wrapped it gently in a silk scarf and took it home. Mama didn't ask questions. She just cleared a spot on the windowsill near the herbs and set out a saucer of dewdrops. Later that night, as I watched it sleep, I opened one of the old forgotten spellbooks that lived under the bed. And there, scribbled in the margins of a page on song magic, was a sketch of something familiar. A nest of glass. An egg marked in spiral. The caption read, "When a bell rings true, the listener hatches." Below that, smaller, "They appear only once in a witch's life. They grow only beside magic that remembers where it began. They do not sing. They become song." I looked at the creature in the scarf. A listener. A familiar not born of spell or study, but of resonance. The bell had called it. Or maybe I had. In either case, it was mine now. Or maybe I was theirs. I named the listener Morrow. Not because it meant tomorrow, though that was part of it. But because it felt like the sound a thought makes when it turns soft, morrow, like fog curling around a warm lantern. That in-between sound, just before a spell begins or a memory returns. Morrow didn't speak. Not with words. Not even the way Solace sometimes did, with pointed looks or tail flicks that clearly meant you forgot the salt again. Morrow hummed. It wasn't constant. It wasn't even regular. But sometimes, when I entered a room or read a page or touched something ancient, Morrow would lift his head, tilt it like a question, and release the quietest vibration. I didn't always hear it, but I felt it. The way you feel wind through your sleeves, or old sadness in a room that hasn't been opened in years. On the third night after he hatched, I had a dream. Not a strange one. Not even magical. Just Mama, standing by the hearth, mixing honey into a cup of elderflower tea. She hummed to herself one of her songs from the village, before she ever grew a garden or wore a bell. But as I watched her in the dream, her face changed. It shifted gently, not frightening, not false, until it was my own. And the humming grew louder. When I woke, Morrow was sitting on my chest, eyes glowing softly. His tiny beak trembled with the fading sound of that hum. The bell around my neck was warm. I whispered, "Was that you?" He didn't nod. But I knew. The next day, I walked with Lark. She'd returned from her cousin's grove with a basket full of frost apples and a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. I told her about the nest, the egg, the dream, and Morrow. She didn't laugh. She didn't blink. She just stared at him perched on my shoulder and whispered, "You heard it too." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I saw a listener once," she said, voice low. "Only in a book, deep in the library, in a corner where even the dust didn't remember itself. They're not familiars. They're fragments." Fragments of what? She didn't answer right away. Then, of the first spells. The wind picked up. Morrow pressed tighter against my neck. "They find witches who haven't forgotten how to feel before they cast," Lark said. "Most of us learn structure first. Precision. Lines and symbols. But you," she looked at me, eyes narrowed like she was peering through me. "You feel everything. That's rare." I didn't know if that was good or bad. I just knew it was true. That night, I sat beside the old mirror in the attic. The one I wasn't supposed to use. Mama had said it reflected more than your face, and sometimes it didn't stop reflecting when you walked away. I looked in. And waited. Nothing moved. Not at first. Then the mirror shimmered. The surface rippled like water, and my reflection shifted. Not older. Not younger. Just different. She wore my clothes. Held my bell. But her eyes were silver. She smiled gently. Then she lifted her hand and drew a shape in the air, a spiral. Like the egg. Like the winter root. Like a thread turning back on itself. I gasped. And behind me, in real life, not the mirror, I heard a sound. Morrow was humming, louder than ever. I turned. He floated above the floor, wings outstretched. Not flapping, just lifted by some pull I couldn't see. The glow from his chest pulsed in rhythm with my bell. The attic blurred. The mirror cracked, not broken, not shattered, but opened. And through it, I saw a field of bells. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some whole, some shattered, some still ringing. I reached out. And the reflection me, the silver-eyed girl, reached back. Our hands met through the mirror. And in that instant, I remembered something. Not from this life, not from my childhood, but from before. Before the hollow, before the bell, before words. I had sung once, in a place like this. I had spun spells not with tongue or ink, but with being. And the world had answered. The mirror dimmed. The attic returned. Morrow curled up in my lap and fell asleep. And I understood, suddenly, why he had chosen me. Not because I was strong, not because I was clever, but because I still listened. There's a door in the hollow that no one speaks about. Not because it's hidden, not because it's cursed, but because it moves. It has no frame, no hinges. Just a wooden arch with carvings like wind, and a handle carved from root bone. You might see it under the frost apple tree one day, or behind the storage shed another, or standing quietly in the middle of the path at dusk like it had always been there. No one ever opens it. Not unless it opens for you. And today, it opened for me. It was early morning, before tea or toast. Morrow was still asleep on the sill, glowing faintly with that silvery hum. I had gone outside to fetch fresh kindling, but the moment I stepped from the porch, there it was. The door, standing by the garden gate. The frost on the handle glimmered gold, and more than anything, I felt it. That slow pull, like when you wake from a dream and remember someone's name before you remember their face. I stepped forward. The door did not vanish. I placed my hand on the root bone handle. It was warm. It pulsed. And then it opened. Not fast. Not loud. It simply unlatched, and with a sigh like a story starting, it swung inward. Beyond it was not the garden. Not the hollow. Not any path I knew. It was a hallway. Long. Lined with shelves filled with objects, bottles, keys, feathers, stones. Each shelf had a small bell hung on it, silent but shimmering. I stepped through. The door closed behind me. Morrow stirred, then flew to perch on my shoulder. We walked. Or drifted, maybe. Time didn't move the way it usually did here. Light came from nowhere. The floor didn't creak. My boots made no sound. I touched one of the bells. It chimed. And suddenly, I remembered something I had never remembered before. A birthday, my 4th. Mama gave me a charm made of snail shell and sugar glass, and I dropped it in the brook before I could even thank her. I'd forgotten it ever happened. But now the memory was clear. And sweet. And sad. I touched another bell. Another memory bloomed. This time, not mine. It was a witch's hands. Older than anyone I'd ever known, mixing shadow with salt to seal away a sorrow that wouldn't die. Her eyes were tired. Her smile was soft. Morrow hummed louder. "This is where forgotten magic goes," I whispered. And I knew I was right. These weren't just shelves. They were weaves. Each bell a knot in a thread. Each object a tangle of feeling, spell, and memory. And the hallway wasn't straight. It was spiraling. Like the listener's egg. Like the dream mirror spiral. Like me. At the very center of the spiral was a table. On it, a book. Bound in bark and black thread, its pages made of pressed leaves and old paper and something that shimmered like frozen breath. The title wasn't written in ink. It appeared as I read it, For the Witch Who Listens. I opened it. The pages didn't have spells. Not in the way I expected. No runes. No instructions. Just songs. Lines of rhythm and feeling. One read, When the world forgets, hum what it used to remember. Another, Where bells do not chime, become the sound. I flipped to the final page. There was no writing. Only a drawing of me. Not quite how I looked now. Older. Wiser. Holding Morrow in one hand, the bell in the other. Eyes silver. Below the drawing was a thread. A real thread, sewn through the page. Spiraled. I touched it. And the book closed. Not just shut, the way a chapter closes when it's ready to become truth. The hallway dimmed. The door appeared again, just beyond the table. This time, carved with my name. Not Thistle. Not the one Mama gave me, but the one the hollow had whispered since the day I heard the bell. Thessala. I stepped back through, and the door disappeared. When I returned home, Mama looked up from her teacup. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just smiled, gently, and said, You've heard it now, haven't you? I nodded. Morrow hummed. The bell pulsed. And I said the name out loud, Thessala. It tasted like dusk and spring and the space between notes. It tasted like me. I woke before the sun. The hollow was quiet, not the sleep of ordinary silence, but the kind that came before something new. The sort of hush a page holds before ink touches it. That's how the day felt. Solace was already at the window, tail flicking with the slow rhythm he reserved for the most curious days. Morrow perched on the sill beside him, blinking his bright eyes. The hum inside him was soft, steady, like breath learning how to be song. I sat up and whispered, Something's going to change today. Morrow didn't reply, but he agreed. After tea, I climbed the old hill above the hollow, the one that overlooked the Bramble Valley and the Crescent Stream. We called it Watcher's Bend, though no one remembered why. When I reached the top, someone was waiting. Not Mama. Not Lark. An old woman in a cloak the color of winter rain. She had no staff, no hat, no glittering symbols or gleaming amulets, just mossy boots, a crooked braid, and eyes like dusk, deep, soft, and ancient. She smiled as I approached. Hello, Thessala, she said, and my name fit perfectly in her mouth. I stopped. You know me? She nodded. I did. And I will again. I blinked. What do you mean? She tapped her heart. You've walked the spiral far enough to return to its beginning. Morrow stirred. The bell at my throat gave a faint chime. She gestured for me to sit beside her. I did. You've met your listener, she said. You've found the door. Do you know what comes next? A spell? I asked. A remembering, she said. The first true spell isn't one you cast. It's one you become. She handed me something from her satchel, a folded piece of old cloth. I unwrapped it and found a single note of music embroidered in silver thread. A hum. Not music. Not melody. Just a feeling. This, she said, is the spell that waits in every witch. Some never awaken it. Some forget it. But the ones who listen deeply, bravely, without forcing meaning, hear it at last. I touched the cloth. The hum rose in my chest. It matched Morrow's. It matched the bell. It matched the strange pull I'd felt my whole life. Now speak your spell, she said. I don't know it. You do, she said gently. You always have. It's made of you. I looked at the valley, the stream, the crooked trees below. I thought of the frost apple grove, the moving door, the memory mirror, the bell. Mama's songs, Solace's loyalty, Lark's laugh, the echo girl and the wind that sang her name. And from somewhere deep inside, older than words, older than the hollow, the spell came. I didn't say it aloud. I breathed it. One breath, one thread, one hum. The hill answered. The trees shimmered. Morrow lifted into the air, wings spread wide, glowing like a second sun. Solace, who had followed me silently, let out a quiet trill I'd never heard before. The old woman smiled. You've remembered. And then she was gone. Not vanished. Not hidden. Just part of it all again. That evening, I returned to the cottage. Mama looked up from the herb table. Was it the day? I nodded. It was. She didn't ask what happened. She just opened her arms and held me. And in that embrace, I realized this path wasn't about becoming a witch. It was about remembering I already was one. That night, I dreamed again. But it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. I stood on a different hill. Another life. Another name. Another sky. And I was humming. All around me, other witches stood in a circle, weaving a song not to change the world, but to remind it. Remind it of softness, of stillness, of spirals and echoes and bells. And in the center of the circle sat a listener, Morrow, but older. And now I knew. He had waited for me across lifetimes, to finish a spell I had started long, long ago. It was early autumn when the mist began whispering names. The hollow always had its moods, rain that giggled, shadows that clung too long to corners, wind that played pranks on laundry lines, but this was different. The mist wasn't behaving like mist. It gathered in low bowls between tree roots, crept across the stones as if searching for something, and curled against the windows of our cottage like it wanted in. And sometimes, if you were quiet, very quiet, you could hear it murmur. Not loud, not clear, just names. Some I knew, Eloan, Bran, Feyre. Some I didn't, Tethril, Nyan, Serenith. All of them shimmered just at the edge of memory, like echoes from someone else's dream. Morrow felt it too. He stopped humming. Not out of fear, but out of listening. That scared me more than if he'd cried out. I told Mama about the mist. She closed her herb book, looked out the window for a long time, and finally said, "It's nearly time." For what? For the lake. I blinked. What lake? She smiled, soft and slow. The one no map can find. The one no one remembers until it's ready to be remembered. That didn't help, but it felt right. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Every witch must walk their lake. Why? Because it holds what you buried. I haven't buried anything. She shook her head. You have, Thessala. You just don't remember when. The path to the lake didn't begin anywhere special. It simply became the way mist becomes rain or dusk becomes night. One moment I was walking through the frostapple grove, the next I was standing at the edge of a mirror. A lake so still, it looked like the sky had fallen and forgotten how to float. Mist curled above the water like fingers holding breath. The trees around it grew in spirals, bending as if listening. There was no boat, no bridge, no stones to skip across. Just a lantern, flickering at the shore, and a single flat leaf, broad as a bed, shaped like a lily but carved of ash and gold. Morrow landed on my shoulder. The bell at my throat gave a single, soft chime. I stepped onto the leaf. It held me, and with a ripple, it glided forward. The lake didn't speak in words. It showed. First, my hands, small, trembling, reaching for a glowing beetle in the grass, only for it to fly away. Then my voice, louder, younger, shouting in a storm, tears blurring the lines of my own spell, turning the wind into a scream. Then a face. One I didn't recognize. A girl, no older than me, with hair like copper moss and a laugh like wind chimes. We sat together once, side by side on a hill. We held hands. We drew spirals in the dirt and whispered dreams to the moon. And then she was gone, and I was crying. Not in the vision. In real life. I wiped my eyes. Who was she? The lake didn't answer, but Morrow pressed closer. His hum was slow, deep. I closed my eyes and remembered. Her name was Keris. We were 7. She was my first friend. Before the hollow, before the bell, before the listener. We'd found each other under a bramble arch after a festival in the human village, both lost, both tired. She'd taken my hand and told me her grandmother was a witch who lived in a moving tree. I told her my mother spoke to bread when she needed it. We'd laughed until dusk. Then, one morning, she was gone. No warning. No farewell. I'd forgotten her. On purpose. Because remembering hurt. The lake had kept her memory for me, and now that I could face it, it gave her back. The lantern on the lake's surface flared brighter. Not fire, but memory made warm. The mist parted, and I saw the bottom of the lake for the first time. There was no mud, no stones, just mirrors. Thousands of them, floating just beneath the surface, all angled so that they reflected each other forever. Each mirror held a different me. Some were young, some were older. One had wings, one had no eyes but glowed like a star. All of them watched me, not judgmental, not unkind, just waiting. I leaned closer, and the reflection changed again. This time, it showed a place I hadn't seen in this life, but knew. A circle of trees, a bonfire of silver light, and voices layered over one another, singing the same hum I had breathed on the hill. Morrow joined the sound. So did the bell. And then, so did I. The lake lifted me. Not high. Just enough. Just enough to feel weightless. Just enough to remember what it was like to trust a world made of feeling, not fact. And it whispered, not with voice, but with presence. Do not fear what you buried. What you bury, you plant. What you plant, you must one day return to. And then the leaf turned. The lantern dimmed, and the lake let me go. When I stepped onto the shore, the mist cleared. The hollow stretched before me, but I was changed. Not taller, not stronger, but stitched back together. Keris's name rang softly in my ears, and I whispered it, a promise. To remember. Morrow settled on my shoulder, humming in harmony, and the bell pulsed, not with a warning, but with peace. The trees knew first, before Mema, before Morrow, before even the mist stirred. They began to grow in subtle spirals, curving not toward the sun, but toward each other, like dancers leaning in for a whispered song. Leaves turned silver at the edges. Bark darkened, veined with glowing green. Even the wind changed direction, circling rather than drifting straight through. I noticed it while hanging herbs to dry. The rosemary leaned left when it always tilted right. The old fig tree bloomed out of season, and the bells tied above the porch rang without wind. That's when I knew the witches were coming. Mama was in the kitchen, her hands deep in dough, but her eyes had that faraway shimmer. The grove is waking, she said, like it was a greeting. It's time. Time for what? For the witches to gather. My heart fluttered like a moth against a lamp. I had heard stories, of course. Gatherings where witches came from far and hidden places to sing their spells, trade secrets, share dreams. But I thought they were for old witches, powerful witches. Not for someone like me, half-grown, only just learning the shape of her own name. Mama seemed to read my thoughts. "You're ready," she said. "Even if you don't feel it." Morrow chirped in agreement, wings unfolding with excitement. Even Solace gave a soft, approving hum. We began preparing immediately. The gathering would take place in the Moonwood Grove, a ring of trees that only opened once a year, and only for those who knew the tune to call it. Mama taught it to me that night, humming while she steeped lavender in milk. It wasn't a song, not in the usual sense. More like a thread of sound, tugged slowly through the air. Soft, low, patient. And when I tried it, the grove heard me. A breeze curled in from nowhere, cool and perfumed with starlight. The way was open. The next morning, witches began arriving. Not all at once, but like birds landing one by one on a shared branch. Some came on foot, cloaks dusted with road magic. Some glided on windships or floating moss. One arrived on the back of a three-eyed owl that vanished as soon as her boots touched the ground. They were not what I expected. No two looked the same. One had glowing tattoos of rivers all along her arms. Another wore a cloak stitched with shadows that moved like fish. A young boy with ivy in his hair played a flute shaped like a seashell. They were strange, but not frightening. They looked at me with recognition, not curiosity, as if they'd met me in dreams before I was born. We lit the heart fire at dusk. It wasn't made of logs, but of dried memory and kindling from the in-between, tiny pieces of forgotten joy, regret, laughter, longing. It burned blue, then white, then gold. Around it, we sat in a spiral, knees brushing moss, hearts open. And the first witch spoke, "Welcome, threadbearers." The second witch followed, "Welcome, memory holders." Then Mama, "Welcome, you who remember your name." Finally, me. I didn't know I would speak. But the words came anyway, "Welcome, those who have listened." The grove sighed. The trees leaned closer. The gathering had begun. We didn't trade spells. Not the way humans think of spells. Instead, we offered moments. A witch from the Salt Coast gave a whisper of a storm she'd taught to sing. Another gave a piece of her grandmother's voice woven into a moth's wing. One by one, they opened tiny boxes, jars, folded paper charms. Inside each, a spell, yes, but one born from feeling, not formula. When it came to me, I hesitated. What did I have to offer? What had I made, truly? Morrow looked up at me, humming. The bell at my neck rang, soft and sure. And I remembered the hum. The one I had breathed on the hill. The one the lake had reflected. I touched my throat, drew the sound forward, and sang. Just one note. But it carried. Not loud, not bold, but true. The other witches stilled, then smiled. One nodded. Another hummed in harmony. Mama's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. That night, as the heart fire faded to silver embers, I lay beneath the spiral branches of Moonwood. Morrow curled on my chest, Solace at my feet. The stars above blinked slowly, like eyes falling asleep. I thought of the lake, the door, the name I had chosen and the names I had forgotten. I thought of the spiral, how it didn't mean circling away, but always deeper. And I knew I wasn't just growing into magic. I was weaving it. One thread, one breath, one story at a time. I awoke to dew-kissed moss and the gentle weight of morrow resting on my chest. The sky above the grove had just begun to blush with morning light, and the trees shimmered like they'd been dusted in dreams. Around me, the other witches still slept, wrapped in cloaks made of starlight, feather, leaf, and threadbare memory. The heart fire had cooled to a ring of warm ash, faintly pulsing like the breath of something very old and very alive. Something called to me, not loudly, just enough. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Solace, who was curled at my feet like a drowsy guardian of moonlight. The air held a hush that wasn't quite silence. I followed it. Beyond the spiral of sleeping witches, a narrow path I hadn't seen before shimmered faintly in the underbrush. Each step I took made the ferns sigh and uncurl, revealing stones with spirals etched into their surface, tiny silver echoes of the symbol I'd traced since I was little. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was meant to. Morrow stirred but didn't stop me. He understood. At the end of the path was a clearing I had never entered but had always known. It felt familiar. In the center stood a tall mirror, taller than any person, framed in branches that had been carved, not grown, each one etched with symbols I recognized from Mama's storybook: circles, threads, stars, bells, open palms. The mirror of the morning star. I knew its name without being told. The mirror didn't show my reflection. Not at first. Instead, it held mist. Soft, shifting, dreamlike. Then, slowly, it began to clear. I expected to see a version of myself older, stronger, maybe wiser. Instead, I saw someone else. A girl. Witch-blooded, yes, but not me. She had hair like wind-tossed wheat, eyes dark as earth after rain, and hands scarred with spells that had cost her something. She was standing in a burnt grove. Alone, but not afraid. She was planting seeds into the ash, whispering to the soil, her voice shaking but steady. And above her, the morning star blinked in a sky not our own. I stepped closer. The mirror rippled. And I understood. She wasn't someone else. She was me. A me I hadn't yet become. A me that might be, if I chose. The mirror shifted again. This time, it showed the past. Not a memory of mine, but of another life, a younger girl, running through a field of golden grass, laughing as shadows danced behind her. There was a village in the distance. A tower. A bell that never stopped ringing. And something chasing her, not a creature, but a feeling. Guilt. Fear. Grief. She tripped. Fell. Got up. Ran anyway. I felt her panic in my chest. Then I saw her stop. Turn. Face the feeling. And instead of swallowing her, it unfolded its arms. And became light. The mirror dimmed. Mist returned. And I saw myself again. This time, not a vision of what was or what might be. Just me. As I was now. Eyes wide. Hands steady. Bell at my throat softly glowing. And behind me, the forest, the lake, the door, the path, Mama's laugh, Morrow's song, Solace's purr, the spiral on my palm. I pressed my fingers to the glass. It was warm. Alive. The voice that spoke wasn't sound, it was presence. To be a witch is to remember in both directions. To hold the seed and the bloom. To honor the ache and the joy. To listen with your whole soul even when the world is silent. The mirror cracked. Not broken. Just changed. A single thread of light ran down the center. And from that light, a small star floated into my palm. Not fire. Not gem. Just possibility. I cupped it gently, and it pulsed like a heartbeat. When I returned to the grove, the witches were rising one by one, stretching, yawning, rubbing sleep from their eyes like dreamers waking from lives they'd lived elsewhere. Mama looked up from the embers. Her eyes met mine. You saw it. I nodded. I was it. She smiled, soft and proud. Good. Now you're ready. For what? For your first weaving. I blinked. Weaving what? The story only you can tell. That day, the witches gathered in a great circle, not of power, but of presence. Each brought forward their thread, song, spell, laughter, loss, stardust, tears. When it came to me, I opened my palm and showed them the star. They did not gasp or applaud. They nodded and began to hum. Together, we wove. Not cloth, not rope, but a moment. A truth that shimmered in the air, golden and gentle. We are many, but we are one. We forget, but we return. We lose, but we listen. And we are never truly alone. The star floated upward, spinning slowly, joining hundreds of others like it. They danced, then vanished. Not gone, just waiting for someone else to remember. That night, as I lay curled beside Morrow and Solace beneath the trees, I whispered, "I'm ready." And I meant it. Not because I had finished learning, but because I had only just begun. It began with a tremor, not in the earth, but in the air. A strange vibration, subtle at first, like the world had hiccuped and hadn't quite recovered. Birds flew in quiet circles. The trees hummed with something brittle. Even Morrow's song lost its rhythm, skipping notes like they were missing altogether. The gathering was over. The witches had departed, leaving the grove with offerings, ash carvings, floating candles, moss rings. Mama and I returned to our cottage, the spiral paths of the hollow welcoming us back with slow, sleepy sighs. But something had changed. Something wasn't holding the way it used to, and I could feel it. Like a thread in my chest had been tugged too far. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way shadows didn't quite line up. How reflections in the wash basin blinked a half-second too late. The familiar bell at my throat would ring faintly even when I was still. Morrow chirped in confusion. Solace would wake with a growl in the middle of the night and stare into corners where nothing stood. I asked Mama about it. She was quiet for a long time, then finally said, "The world is loosening its edge." Why? Because the thread has frayed. My heart thudded. The thread? She nodded. The one that holds the stories of all witches, past and future. The thread we walk, the one that binds us, not in chains, but in remembrance. Can it be fixed? Yes, she said, her voice gentle. But it will ask something of you. That night, I dreamt of the weaving tree. It stood at the center of nothing. A vast, blank sky wrapped around roots that reached down through stars. Its bark was black as ink, and from its branches hung thousands of threads, some bright as gold, others dim as coal. They swayed, tangled, spun themselves into knots, and unraveled again. One thread was mine. It pulsed softly, silvery white, weaving between others, looping and twisting like a spell mid-breath. And it was tearing. Not cut, not broken, but slowly fraying. I reached for it. And the tree opened its eyes. Eyes like hollow moons, deep and endless. It didn't speak. But I understood. To mend the thread, you must face the unwoven. When I awoke, I knew what I had to do. I packed my satchel, salt petals, a stitched map Mama made from dreams, a flame charm shaped like a spiral, a silver thimble full of tears, and the bell. Morrow perched on my shoulder without needing to be asked. Solace circled twice, then padded beside me. Mama met me at the gate of the hollow. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled as she handed me a ribbon. It shimmered between dusk and dawn, neither color, both at once. "Whatever you meet, remember this," she said. "You are not just a thread. You are a weaver." I tied the ribbon around my wrist. It pulsed once, and I stepped onto the path. The way to the unwoven place was not marked. It appeared slowly, as if remembering itself. A clearing that bled into mist. A door without a wall. A bridge that refused to connect both sides. I crossed anyway. Each step peeled something away. My name, my scent, the sound of my breath. Not to take it from me, but to carry it until I was ready again. At the center stood a figure. Not a person. Not a witch. Something made of mitre-bins. Shifting, fluid, stitched together from regrets and forgotten choices. It had no eyes, yet it saw me. It had no mouth, yet it spoke. You came to fix the thread. I nodded. You cannot fix what you do not own. My voice shook. Then I'll own it. It held out a hand, long and shimmering. In its palm was a mirror shard, small, jagged, and humming. Show me, I whispered. It did. Every mistake, every forgotten kindness, every spell I didn't finish, every fear I let choose my path. I saw myself hiding, shrinking, waiting too long to speak truth. I saw a younger me who thought she wasn't enough. I saw every time I let a thread go, thinking it wouldn't matter. And it hurt. But I didn't look away. When the vision faded, I placed my hand over my chest. The ribbon on my wrist shimmered, and the bell at my neck sang. Not loud, not bright, but true. The mirror shard rose into the air and melted into silver light. The unwoven lowered its head, and with a breath that smelled like the very first dawn, it whispered, thread mended. The world shuddered, not in fear, but in completion. Like a book finally closed after the last word had found its page. The path returned. So did my name. The hollow sang a welcome as I stepped back into the world. Mama stood waiting, her eyes full of stories. Solace padded ahead to reclaim his corner. Morrow hummed the old lullaby. And me. I sat beneath the spiral fig tree, looked down at the thread around my wrist, now glowing softly, whole, and whispered, I remember. The thread was mended, not because I had mastered anything, but because I had faced it, owned it, woven it back in with gentleness and truth. And in that weaving, I had become myself. It was the season when the fog lingered longer than the sun, when even the trees wore shawls of silver mist, and the fireflies blinked slower as if they, too, were remembering. I had returned home weeks ago, to the hollow, to the crooked cottage with moss-lined steps, to Mama, who hummed lullabies while stirring tea that glowed blue, to Solace, who slept so soundly now he barely growled at dreams, to Morrow, who had grown quieter, no longer chirping constantly, but speaking with fewer, deeper notes, like a song that had learned patience. But though everything looked the same, I had changed. Not all at once, and not in a way you could point to, but little things, the way I no longer hesitated before choosing a spell, the ease with which I spoke my name, even to the stars, the way the bell around my neck rang true now, its tone no longer tentative, but warm and full. And most of all, the spiral in my palm had deepened. Not just a mark anymore, but a path, a map, a memory. One morning, Mama handed me a folded letter sealed in wax. The spiral pressed into it gleamed faintly with morning dew. No name, I asked. She smiled. It's for you. I opened it carefully. Inside, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were just 3 words. The grove calls. My breath caught. I thought the gathering had ended. I thought my thread had already been woven. But this wasn't about fixing the thread. It was something else. I looked at Mama. She was already packing my satchel. You won't need many things, she said. Just your voice. And your story. The grove was different this time. Quieter. Not empty, but listening. The spiral trees leaned in, their silver leaves shimmering like breath held still. The heart fire had already been lit, but no witches stood around it. Only a single seat, woven from root, wind, and wildflower. Waiting. For me. I stepped forward slowly. Morrow flew overhead once, then settled in a high branch. Solace curled beside the fire without a word. I Saturday. And the grove sighed. like a story opening its first page. One by one, they arrived. Not all witches. Some were too young to know the word. Some too old to say it anymore. But all of them carried something familiar. A bell, a thread, a shimmer in their eye that spoke of magic waiting in their bones. They sat around me, not in silence, but in expectancy. Not asking for answers, but a story. So I gave them mine. I told them about the lake and the door, the name I chose, the spell I unraveled, the gathering and the mirror and the morning star, the unwoven and the shard of truth. I told them about fear and how it isn't weakness if you listen to it. I told them how the thread in your palm can guide you, but only if you're brave enough to feel it tangle. And when I finished, there was no applause, only quiet. A moment held gently between all of us. And then, the youngest witch, a girl with leaves in her braids and moss on her boots, stood and said, "I think I have a thread, too." She held it out, trembling, but sure. And that's how it began. The second gathering was not like the first. It wasn't a circle of elders sharing old spells. It was something new. A spiral. Witches of all kinds, young, old, quiet, fierce, gathered not in rows but in motion. Moving toward the center. Toward story. Toward truth. No spellbooks opened. No rituals were cast. But the grove shimmered with more magic than I'd ever felt. Because here, finally, we weren't just remembering. We were becoming. The grove stayed open after that. Not every day. Not always in the same place. Sometimes it appeared by the sea, where waves whispered forgotten chants. Sometimes deep in the city, behind an ivy-covered gate. Sometimes in dreams. But it always held the same spiral. And those who followed it. Those who listened to the tremble in the thread, who honored the ache in their own magic, found their way there. And when they did, I was there to greet them. Not as a child anymore. Not even as just a witch. But as a weaver. Years passed. I watched as new witches found their names. As they opened their palms and showed the spirals only they could follow. Some stayed. Some wandered. All remembered. And every so often, when the fog curled just right and the wind carried bells that hadn't been rung in years, Mama would visit. She never knocked. Just walked into the grove with a basket of honey cake and a smile like starlight. We'd sit under the fig tree, and she'd say the same thing each time. "Still weaving, I see." And I'd nod and answer, always. On the last night of one such visit, long after the others had gone to sleep, Mama handed me a small, folded square. Inside was a single thread. Not silver. Not gold. Just plain soft grey. But it pulsed. "Is this yours?" I asked. "No," she said, touching my hand. "It's yours." Again. I didn't understand until I looked at it more closely. It wasn't just a thread. It was a beginning. Of another story. Of another spiral. Waiting to be told. And so I sat, by the fading fire, thread in hand, and whispered into the dark. I remember the name I chose. I remember the spell I sang. I remember the thread I followed. And now, I smiled. I'll begin again. And the grove leaned close, the stars blinked low, and the spiral turned once more. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.